Hey, Lauren, thank you for sitting down with me today. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed your lesson, the social studies lesson that you taught. I like how you used the smartboard to deliver the lesson, and you asked a lot of probing questions, which really got the kids thinking about what you were going to be teaching them, and also used a lot of visuals. So there was a lot of images in there to make connections with the kids. They could visualize it and then see it come alive on the board. And you asked a lot of like turn and talk questions, so they were able to discuss what you were teaching them, and they were also able to come up with maybe questions that they were having to kind of fill in the gaps in their knowledge. I just have a few questions for you. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst lesson you've taught and 10 being the best, how would you rank that lesson?
I'd say it was a 6 or 7. I don't think it was the best lesson I've ever taught, but I did think it was informative.
What pleased you about your lesson?
I thought that, first of all, the information in the PowerPoint was directly correlated with the Georgia Standard of Excellence. So I think the instructional strategy that related to that was appealing to anybody who watched it, because it was, targeted for what the kids were specifically supposed to learn. I think that the kids were very engaged, and they had some really good ideas when I was walking around listening to the things that they were saying when they were turning and talking with their neighbor. I was actually kind of surprised at some of the things they were thinking of. And the candy questions, everybody likes candy, so I think that was good.
Yeah, they really enjoyed that. What would you have to change to move that lesson closer to a 10?
So I think with the lesson, it was very direct. It was direct instruction. Even though they were engaged, they were turning, talking, there wasn't much for me to assess. I could walk around, I could observe them, I could take anecdotal notes, but I wasn't assessing any kind of work sample. So with that, what I'd like to do is, if we could have moved through that lesson and then gone into centers, I could have had a group with me doing the small group so we could discuss more of the information about the Panama Canal. Any of the students who didn't get to finish their note taking would have a little bit of extra time. That's that extended time for differentiation. And then we could have had another center at their seats working on maybe an informational or opinion piece that could have related directly to Theodore Roosevelt and how he could have informed his citizens that he was going to build the Panama Canal, or they could have collected information of their thoughts of how they would have felt if they were a citizen. So almost having a debate kind of. And then something on the computer would have been nice, some kind of technology piece so that they could have started maybe learning about Adobe Spark or some kind of technology piece, because I know in the next lesson we're going to work on Adobe Spark and creating Adobe Spark about Theodore Roosevelt and the Panama Canal and how he didn't inform his citizens. So I could have done something maybe to assess their knowledge on Adobe Spark there.
Okay. What would your students be doing differently if your class lesson was a 10? Say this was a 10 out of 10 for you. What else could you have had? And you kind of already answered that about how you would have integrated a technology piece in there. Is there anything else you think you would have added to kind of extend their learning or deepen their understanding?
I think just to piggyback off what I was saying, the lesson wasn't really differentiated. It was in the fact that some students had fill-in-the-blank notes, some students had regular notes. We had the anchor chart for them to be able to fill in notes if they were just a little bit slow at writing or more engaged in conversation and didn't get to write it down. But that's not truly differentiation in the investigation of their learning. So I think with the small group piece, maybe we could use the Studies Weekly newspaper and have them read, turn and talk to each other, answer the think and review questions so I can get a true work sample from them on their comprehension of the content. And that would be more of a remediation center. And then for an independent center, I think everybody needs to go through the technology piece. And like I said, I think what we would do is probably have them kind of explore Adobe Spark, maybe do some kind of web quest with it so they can go through the different steps of how they created Adobe Spark, what features it offers, and then maybe take a quiz at the end so I can get their proficiency level on Adobe Spark. And then the extension group who maybe has already mastered that quiz and knows how to work Adobe Spark could come to their seats and do that informational piece, so they can go ahead and collect information or ideas of how they could have changed Theodore Roosevelt's decision, and if they were him, how they could have informed the citizens about Panama Canal, almost like getting a head start on their project, but still making it a little bit more rigorous for their learning.
And I really like how you talked about how when some kids already have it, they can move on to something else, and how some kids, they need a little extra time. So web quests are great for students to work at their own pace. And then I know you have some advanced learners, so sometimes they already get in, they're ready to move on. So having a whole lesson just dedicated to just learning about Adobe Spark, I think that's good that you differentiated even that lesson, because some kids get it and some kids need a little bit more time.
Right, and since we are an arts integrated school, you know, a lot of teachers have used it in the past, but some haven't, and so some of the students may already know how to use it, and vice versa.
Okay. And you kind of already answered my next question when I was going to ask you to tell me more about like what that would look like. You talked about using Adobe Spark, about differentiating different levels of technology use in the classroom. Is there anything else you think you would change? Or I think what you said was really good.
And I have to hit on the closing. You know, we didn't have a real strong closing. That opening, we had the candy questions. They were engaged. We were kind of reviewing the content before bridging that gap from one event to the next. But we didn't really have a strong closing. It was just kind of like, okay, that's it, and we're done. And we had to move on. You know, granted, I think today with time restraints, it just ran out of time. But you have to make time for that closing. So adding that in there as well.
How would you measure that change?
I think if we, let me see if this is what you're asking. So if I were to put those changes into place, then how would I measure the lesson? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Either daily or weekly, something where it's more frequent.
Got you.
So you can measure to make sure that it's working for all of your students.
No, I understand. Okay. So I think with us using Seesaw as a school, I think it's important for the kids to be responsible for their learning. And so with that, they could record their progress both through self-reflection, taking a picture of their quiz score, uploading data of new things they found, or even creating some kind of discussion forum for the kids to go and ask questions about Adobe Spark or any technology that we're working on at the time, so that they can interact with each other. They're using technology to do it, you know, and it just makes them a little bit more responsible for their learning, because it's easy for them to sit in the chairs and say, hey, I don't understand how to do this, and the teacher goes and shows them, and then, hey, I don't understand to do this. Whereas if they have to explore and, you know, have that accountability piece so that I can measure the data, but they can also kind of look at it later on and be like, oh, I forgot how to add music to the background, and go back to that discussion, I think it would be beneficial for them.
That's a really good idea. Do you want that to be your goal?
Yes, I think it would be important for me, because I'm not very comfortable with technology, to not only use technology, but be able to have a way to measure it and how effective it is for my students and where they need to go from there. Because I think as we grow this group of 21st century learners, everything's moving towards technology. Our jobs are moving into technology. Even the smaller children who are not even in school know how to use iPhones and iPads. So if we're not teaching through technology, we're not really moving on with society. And to do that, not only do I have to make myself accountable, but I have to let them be accountable too.
I agree. I really agree. So if you hit that goal, like if your kids became very proficient with either Seesaw or Adobe Spark, would that matter to you?
Absolutely.
In this whole scheme of thing in your classroom?
Absolutely, because I don't feel comfortable with technology myself, and so because I don't feel very comfortable with it, I probably don't use it in the classroom as much as I should. And then I'm really doing a disservice to my kids, because when they do graduate high school and they move on to their career path, whether it's college or you know, moving on into their career, it's always going to be based around technology. That's where we're moving. You know, it's no longer this standard factory workers where we didn't have to have that knowledge. So if I don't teach them, I'm doing them a disservice, and that's important to me.
Okay. What teaching strategy can you use to hit your goal?
Well, I think going back to the original lesson, with any kind of technology you use, it's important to gauge the student knowledge before you ever implement it. A lot of times, I think as a teacher, either A, we get up there and we say, this is what we're going to do today, and we show them how to use the technology very briefly. We don't spend the amount of time that we would spend on teaching them the content and then we have a lot of kids that are left behind. Or we may get up there and we're teaching it, and some kids already know how to use whatever technology application it is, or tool, and so we're wasting their time. So I think continuing with that center rotation and making sure that when we're using technology, we put some kind of mini lesson that's more self-exploratory, so that the students are taking their learning into their own accountability instead of putting it off on me as to how do I do this, what do I do. They have to figure it out on their own. And then, like I said, with the Seesaw, we can have the students kind of creating a discussion forum where they ask each other questions, they can answer each other's questions. It's similar like when you buy something on Amazon and you have a question about how the fit is, and it'll email somebody who's already used the product, hey, here's a question. So somebody who's already used Adobe Spark and is very fluent on it, hey, how do I add sound to my background? And they can answer each other's questions.
I think that's a really good idea. It also empowers the students to be showcase their knowledge a little bit easier as well, because they're not only creating something, they're actually helping another student. And sometimes the kids just explain it better to kids.
Right.
Okay, so let's make a student goal together based on their learning targets. What would you want a student focused goal to be?
Okay, so let's start with the verbs. So I want them to create. I want them to explain, because I want them to explain their content knowledge, and I want them to be able to present their knowledge too. So what if we say that students will be able to create an Adobe Spark to explain content knowledge from other areas? And with that, if maybe they could create like a digital story library, that they could, almost like how we do OneNote, they could have a library of these different kind of Adobe Sparks that they're making, so that A, we can kind of keep this collection of knowledge, I can go back and refer to it, but B, when they learn new skills in that particular application, they can go back, almost like when we edit in writing, they can go back and add things to their Adobe Spark.
Okay, I really like that. I like how it's more of like a fluid thing where they can always continually go back and add and add and add to it. Okay, so let's maybe talk about some of the tools that you want to use to achieve this goal. So what are some technology, either applications or avenues that you feel comfortable with using right now?
So I picked Adobe Spark because I am pretty fluent in using it. I mean, there's always new things that are coming out in effects that you can add. So I'm not going to say that I'm a master at it, but I'm fluent enough to teach the children. So Adobe Spark would be an application we would have to use. We'd also want to utilize Seesaw so that we can kind of have that discussion forum, so that the kids can help answer each other's questions, whether I'm in small group or whatever the case may be. I want them to be able to interact and take accountability for their learning. And then to use those programs, we would need probably the iPad cart. We have our classroom desktops, and then definitely we're going to have the headphones with the microphone attached.
Oh yeah, they have the mic for quality of sound. That's
so they
really
can
good.
voice over. We're not just using like the standard typing on the board, and then like we've got some music in the background. I'd like them to be able to explain in parts that they feel like they need to.
Nice. Okay. So just to recap, we talked about your student goal is that students will be able to create an Adobe Spark video where they can explain knowledge from different content areas and create more like a storytelling or like a digital library of their knowledge and understanding. And they will use Adobe Spark as the creation platform. They will use Seesaw as like a sharing platform, and they'll use the iPads, the computers, and headphones with microphones in order to create all of this.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That sounds great.
I think it sounds really good.
Well, I can't wait. Thank you for helping me with everything.
Thank you for letting me come in. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.